We are back here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. It is Thursday, October 23rd, as you're listening to this, and we've got a lot to talk about. Always seem to with this administration. There is so much going on, and let's go ahead and get into it. We are dealing with the 23rd day of the government being shut down. Does not appear that it's going to end anytime soon. Now, if it does pass today, which I don't think it will, but if it would, they probably would open the government tomorrow. But if it doesn't open tomorrow and they pass something, it may not get opened back up until next week. But I really think this is probably going to last up and through next week, maybe even as late as the first of the month, getting into the first of November. Why? Well, the first is going to change things as people start missing their uh, food stamp payments and people start going hungry. They are going to be getting pissed. And as those stories of people going hungry and not having access to food hit, Republicans are going to be the ones taking the blame because they're not there. At least the House of Representatives isn't there doing any negotiations. Thank you, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He is not having any votes. He is constantly canceling votes and just saying, well, pass the CR, pass the CR. And then Senate Republicans just keep bringing up the same CR for a vote. They haven't made any changes. They haven't made any offers. There's been no negotiations. Donald Trump held a meeting earlier this week where he talked to Senate Republicans. And when he was talking to them at this luncheon, they said, well, do what you have to do. Get the Democrats to sign off on the CR. Do not cave. Do not negotiate. Don't give them anything. So it sounds like all sides, Republicans do not want to give anything here in these negotiations. So the blame falls squarely with them. Um, Now you're going to have Republicans and MAGA coming in and try to say, well, Republicans need to pass this clean CR. Democrats should sign off on it because Republicans would always vote for clean CRs under Democrats. And there's differences here. Um, and the two big differences is one, the Affordable Care Act subsidies expire at the end of the year. Republicans keep promising we'll talk about it later. Here's the problem, there's not much later left. Later is here because we're down to about 2 months, a little over 2 months to the end of the year. And by the time the first of the month rolls around, we'll be down to under 2 months to the end of the year. So how much later is there as places have to start getting their healthcare premiums out, et cetera? They need to know what that's going to look like, um, and what they're going to charge people for their insurance and what the coverage is going to be and everything like that. So I think Republicans may be facing a November 1st deadline, but they've got something else on the horizon too, as to why they may have to come back and actually vote on something. Now, Mike Johnson has been trying to tell Senate Democrats just pass our clean CR and we will come back and we'll talk about it. Well, it's not a clean CR, first of all. Um, we talked about the Affordable Care Act subsidies expiring, but as I've talked about in numerous videos, in between the last CR and this one, the Republicans passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, which cut spending to a lot of programs, including Medicaid, cut like $1 trillion from Medicaid over the next 10 years, um, and did all of that. Well, that's not a clean CR by comparison because it's not keeping funding at previous levels, it's keeping it at new levels that Democrats didn't agree to. So the levels that Democrats had agreed to in March are gone, and they agreed to it in good faith. And Republicans said, "Yeah, screw you. We're going to change it anyway." Uh, so beyond that, Mike Johnson may have to bring the House back to actually negotiate. Why? Well, look at the calendar. We are on the 23rd day of October. Now, the next or the CR that they have passed in the House that they passed in early September or mid September expires on like the 21st or the 17th of November, something like that, middle to end of November. Even if they pass it right now, they may not have enough time to negotiate anything else and trying to get funding, even later. And they may be dealing with right around Thanksgiving having to deal with another government shutdown and the government going into a shutdown right around a holiday. And I don't think either side really wants that. I don't think they want to see the government shut down through Thanksgiving or into December. Um, but if they don't negotiate, there may not be an end in sight here. So Republicans might have to bring the House of Representatives back because of the calendar, because of the simple fact there's only a few weeks left in what that CR would cover. And it didn't say in the CR, from the way I understand it, they didn't say, well, we're going to fund the government for 7 weeks or something. It specifically had a date in there, and that date was either the 17th or the 21st. I've heard both. Um, and it doesn't really matter if it is the 17th or the 21st. That's only a 4 day difference. Either way, it's ending quickly if they do pass it today. They'd open the government back up for a couple of weeks, and it would be right back to shut down. So that doesn't solve any problems, especially if they're not negotiating and not getting anything done. But when Mike Johnson brings up the House back in for a vote, he's got a problem because once he brings the House in for full session to vote on anything or to even discuss voting on another CR, let's say maybe it kicks the can down the road to January. Um, then he's asked to swear in Representative Grijalva, and Representative Grijalva ends up becoming the 218th signature on the discharge petition. So what could happen? Well, she signs the discharge petition, and as Mike and I, the Rational Boomer, have talked about on his podcast, it's entirely possible that Donald Trump uses the Speaker of the House as a way to end up uh, hiding this discharge petition for weeks because he doesn't want to have it see the light of day. He's trying to juggle all of these negative things around him, and it's not working. He can't keep everything going and everything away from the media. So maybe he tries to use the Speaker of the House. And what would he do? Well, maybe he calls up one of his friends in the House even before they vote on the you know, discharge petition and says vacate the chair. He didn't keep it hidden. He's calling it for a vote. You know, get rid of Mike Johnson. So they vote to get rid of Mike Johnson. Now, Democrats have no reason to save Mike Johnson at this point, other than pissing off Donald Trump, and so they could potentially vote against Mike Johnson. Now, maybe they save him if it's before they open the government back up, just because it would by losing the Speaker of the House, it would be harder to negotiate. It would be harder to do anything because the House would grind to a complete stop if there is no Speaker. So by doing that and saying, well, we're going to let them vote out the Speaker and we're not going to save him, they would be saying we agree to extend indefinitely the government shutdown until you guys vote in a Speaker. And I don't think they want to do that. But then once they vote the government back into session, if they pass something, Donald Trump may still say, well, you still need to get rid of him. Mike Johnson may not survive this. He may not be Speaker by the end of the year. I don't think that he is going to be Speaker come the midterms. I think it is almost a foregone conclusion. It's not a guarantee, but it's getting there because Donald Trump wants what he wants. He is going to have to do. He's not going to be able to negotiate here on this. He wants to keep the Epstein files hidden. He doesn't, while he wants the government funded, he doesn't want to appear weak by caving to Democrats, even though they've done it before. So Donald Trump, by being himself here, is his own worst enemy. And Mike Johnson could pay the price. So it's entirely possible that at some point in the near future they hold a vote to get rid of the Speaker of the House. And it'll be interesting to see if the Democrats actually save Mike Johnson or if they say, yeah, you know what? You creepy little fucker. You've done so many things that, are wrong here. You've held up Senator or Representative Grijalva. You've held up votes. You have just tried to do whatever you want here. We don't like you. You're gone. Good luck, Republicans. Find a new speaker. Now, until they find a speaker, that would mean all House business is done. They can't do anything. And if they're not doing anything, that means they can't hold a discharge petition. They can't sit on committees. They can't do anything like that until they have a speaker. And who are they going to get? There's not really that many Republicans in the House of Representatives that I can think of that would actually be a decent Speaker of the House, um, and that would want the leadership role, and that could get to 218 votes. I mean, it took them 3 weeks last time to come up with Mike Johnson, and we didn't even expect them to vote him back in when they took Congress back over in January. But they did because they didn't really have anybody else. Um, so we'll see if Mike Johnson survives the year as Speaker. I don't know if he makes it to the midterms. Either way, after the midterms, I think Democrats take the House back. I'm thinking 30 or 40 seats, maybe even more, depending on how this government shutdown goes, how things go between here and there, and you know how sentiment is. If the economy continues to look like shit, like it has been, if things are still unaffordable and people can't afford anything, well, why would people vote Republicans back into power? Now, typically in history, the party in power loses 30 or 40 seats in the House during the midterm elections. Now, that did not happen in Biden's midterm. I think they only lost like 20 seats, something like that, barely gave Mike Johnson a majority, and nothing got accomplished. So if Democrats take control of the House and the Senate after the midterms, they're going to be controlling a lot of what is going on here. They're going to control what gets passed, what budgets go through, and they're not going to get a bunch of spending cuts passed. Oh, excuse me. They're going to end up just being able to, pass bare bones things. But the big thing that the Democrats are going to be able to accomplish by having control of the House is investigations. And believe me, there are going to be lots of congressional investigations calling Christy Nome and the Department of Homeland Security in, asking questions about ICE and what ICE is doing and who ICE is hiring. Because we're hearing that a lot of them can't even pass the physical requirements to be agents and things like that. That and how they're not giving people due process, not giving them access to their rights. And whether you like it or not, because MAGA will tell you that it shouldn't be this way, everybody inside the United States does have certain rights, and you have to, in order, before you can even say, well, you're undocumented, you're an illegal alien, you need to leave. You have to give them certain rights to prove that. And MAGA hates that fact. They hate it with a passion. And right now, ICE is just trying to ignore all of it and do what they want. Well, there are going to be congressional hearings when Democrats are back in control of the House, asking what's going on with this. They're going to be looking into a lot of things, including the ballroom that Donald Trump is building. And those congressional investigations are not going to be good for Republicans going into 2028. And I don't think Republicans are terrified of Democrats having any sort of vote or any sort of sway over the 2028 elections by having these um, public hearings. It's going to be a bad day for Republicans, and they are really worried about all of that. Some of the other things that could be investigated by Republicans or by Democrats in the House of Representatives beyond ICE and the ballroom. Donald Trump himself could be brought up on an impeachment investigation yet again. I know they are worried about whether or not Donald Trump gets impeached. That has been something they've been talking about. Specifically, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has talked about midterms and says, well, if the Democrats retake the House, it's almost a guarantee Donald Trump gets impeached again. Well, gee, why would you say it like that? Now, you want us to believe that it is because the Democrats are these evil people and that they're just doing it because they hate Donald Trump. And that's not true. It's a simple fact of look at all of the things Donald Trump has done that are illegal that shouldn't have been allowed to happen, but because Republicans in Congress are spineless and just cave to Donald Trump at every turn, that they end up needing to deal with it. And Democrats are going to be holding investigations on all of those events. Now, uh, some of the things that Donald Trump has done that are illegal, but look at shuttering some government agencies. Those shouldn't be allowed to be just taken apart and shut without any congressional approval because Congress had passed budgets and funds and things like that for these agencies. Yet Donald Trump wants to ignore all of that and just say, yeah, well, it doesn't matter. We're going to do things our way and it's okay. No, it's not. But Donald Trump, again, doesn't care about any of that. He wants his way. So he's just been doing it, and Congress hasn't been pushing back at all. So he's getting away with doing a lot of this stuff. Problem is, Democrats are going to be holding investigations into what's going on, and there's going to be a lot of things brought to light that is going to be very embarrassing to the Republican Party. Things they don't want people to know about what's going on here, how Donald Trump is getting away with everything, how he is able to pressure certain Republicans to just look the other way and not go after him. Now, one of the things I mentioned was the renovation of the White House. Well, it really looks like they're not doing anything with any sort of care. There are ways you are supposed to go about renovating historical buildings, specifically ones that may have asbestos in them, like the East Wing of the White House. They're not doing any of that. They've got no approval from anybody to do it. And now, even though Donald Trump himself had swore that his ballroom wasn't going to touch up against the East Wing, all it was going to do was have, just a little opening, and it was going to be nothing big. Now he is tearing out not only the entire facade, but we don't know for sure, but it sounds like they may end up having to uh, tear into the entirety of the East Wing, and the East Wing may just be gone. And that is not Donald Trump's personal residence. He lives there, sure, but he gets it rent free from the American taxpayer. It is bought and owned by the US government. And there are ways in which you are supposed to be able to go and do the renovations. Now, certain renovations do have within certain limits you do not need congressional approval, but other things you do. Now, for example, Donald Trump paving over the Rose Garden. I don't think he needed any permit. He might have needed permits to lay the cement, but he didn't need any permits to tear out the rose bushes and things like that because that wasn't structural. And if you go back to Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House, and Ronald Reagan took them back out. Again, those within limits, not as big of a deal as what we are talking about here. Now, Republicans are trying to apologize, MAGA specifically. They are coming in, well, he's the president. He can just do that. He doesn't need approval from anybody. Yes, he does. It is not his house. He is doing all of this. And as Mike and I over on the Rational Boomer podcast talked about a little bit, we are discussing this idea that Donald Trump might be doing this trying to build his legacy. He's talking about getting this ballroom done, and he wants to build the Arc de Triomphe or Arc de Trump, that we don't need. All about building a lasting legacy so people remember Donald Trump. Here's the thing. Donald Trump is going to go down in history as a very notorious president, a very nefarious president. He is going to go down as the worst president in American history when it's all said and done. He is going to be somebody who is remembered, but for all of the reasons he doesn't want to be, for being incompetent, for having great changes to presidential power. And I think ultimately it wouldn't surprise me if they pass something in Congress after he is out of office, maybe an amendment or two to the Constitution. And I know that's a high bar to get done, trying to change how presidential authority works, who can be elected president, etc., all because of Donald Trump. And while he is, um, wanting to work about his legacy, that is ultimately going to be his legacy, is going to be the indictments that follow his term, the criminality that is going to be remembered with his term, um, and all of the investigations and any changes to presidential power that Congress has to come in and make as a result of him being in office. Now, with this tearing down of the East Wing to build this gaudy, um, you know, 90,000 square foot ballroom, it is going to be bigger. The ballroom itself is going to be bigger than the general White House. And it's going to be gold plated, of course, or at least gold painted, because we find out Donald Trump doesn't actually use real gold plating. Um, he uses, you know, fake gold spray paint enough to make it look gold ish, typically, because he's all about appearances. And then he was, of course, going to want this gaudy ballroom named after him. Now, are they going to name it the Trump Ballroom? Temporarily. But then I think after Donald Trump is out of power and after this term is done in 28, when we have a Democrat in office, if it is still, if it's not finished, I don't know if they finish the ballroom or how that is going to work, or if they tear it down and they try to rebuild the White House back to the way it was. That is also a possibility, but that would be a big giant waste of money on both parts. And I could see Republicans lashing out at a Democrat for trying to get rid of the ballroom once it's built for wasting all this money, but crickets right now from them about getting it built. Now, Donald Trump likes to say that it has been privately funded, that he is putting in some of his own money, but again, no records of that have come forward. There isn't a list yet of donors as far as um, that. So we don't know where the money is coming from. And then Donald Trump is trying to sue his own DOJ for $230 million, which was conveniently the price tag of the ballroom. So he's trying to find a way to make it so that uh, the government still pays for it, even though Congress hasn't approved the funds to do it. And then what happens if Democrats take back over in the midterms and there is money flowing in from Congress to pay for this big renovated ballroom? They could turn the money off, but then what happens? Does it just sit there like a big ugly eyesore until a Republican is back in charge to finish it? Or do they pass something requiring it to be torn down? And what happens? Don't know. Now, could Donald Trump face criminal charges for doing this around the process? He could, but he won't until his term is over, because Pam Bondi wouldn't go after him, and that's who it would fall on. It would fall on the DOJ to go after him. The only thing that could happen is that he could get impeached and removed, but I don't see Republicans doing that. Democrats might, just because they need to move on to J.D. Vance, and at least get somebody normal in there. And I think even Democrats, despite how bad it may hurt them in 28 to have J.D. Vance as the top of the ticket and as the president, just because there'd be some people who said, well, J.D. Vance didn't get a full term. We should give him a full term and see what he can really do. I could see people having that logic with J.D. Vance, and getting rid of Donald Trump would, you know, make that happen. However, with that, they would still be better off getting rid of Donald Trump, because J.D. Vance wouldn't be doing things on a whim like Donald Trump does, because Donald Trump is just a petulant child. He's a toddler who has the levers of power. And whatever he decides is what they are going to focus on that day, that's what they do. Now, I don't think his health holds out all the way to 2028. We've talked about it before. I don't think his health holds. You got too many issues. You've got his swollen ankles. where he is admitted to having a vein issue and he's having blood flow problems. That usually is a sign of something major underlying. You have dementia problems where he starts talking about um, people who aren't alive, who aren't even real, as if they're real people. Like he was talking about Hannibal Lecter during the campaign and referred to Hannibal Lecter as the late great Hannibal Lecter. And just things like that, talking about how he was going to Russia when he was actually going to Alaska. And just the list goes on about how he is having varying issues here. I just don't think he makes it to the end of the year because of his health, and that is probably for the best when it comes to this country. However, Republicans don't want that to happen. They want to prop him up for as long as they possibly can because when he goes, they want to make sure that he uh, goes out in a way that he can't burn the Republican Party down in the process. And how would he burn the Republican Party down? Well, imagine a scenario like this. Public outcry over the House of Representatives or the White House renovations gets loud enough that they end up doing something in the House of Representatives. Say a rogue member of the Republican Party, like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, comes out and says, "Okay, well, I'm going to file a impeachment articles against Donald Trump." So they do. They file impeachment articles against Donald Trump. It comes to the floor and they somehow pass it. He gets impeached by his own party. And because the Republicans are leading the charge, maybe he gets removed because they want to move on to JD Vance. But Donald Trump is still mostly cognitive. And I say that mostly because, like I said, he talks about people who aren't real as if they are, and then comes around and says things like, you know, he's going to Alaska, all of that. Like he has his own issues, but he can still get his points across. So if they happen to impeach and remove him now, he would burn down the Republican Party and JD Vance around it, letting out the cat out of the bag of everything that he knows. He would turn Republican sentiment because there's at least 30% of this country, or 30% of the Republican Party, even, that will believe anything Donald Trump says. And they turn around and he'll say, well, he'll do all of this out on Truth Social, etc. Their best hope as the Republican Party would be for him to be taken out, whether it's choking on a Big Mac, whether he has a stroke or something where he is non communicative, where he can't talk to the outside world and he can't burn them down. And they can get away with getting rid of him ahead of the 2028 general election. Um, it'd be easier on them if he can't burn the party down in the process. So Republican parties are in a no-win situation here. They have tied their wagon to Donald Trump, and they had every opportunity to get rid of Donald Trump, and they had their best opportunity um, after January 6, 2021. Mitch McConnell could have turned around and said, you know what? Doesn't matter that his term is over. What he did was so egregious. We need to convict him and say, well, he is not allowed to ever hold public office again. But they didn't do that. Mitch McConnell said, well, his term's over. It doesn't really matter. It's a criminal proceeding now, and that the DOJ handle it. He expected the Democrats to clean up their mess. But then they could have just said, okay, well, we're not going along with it. Even if they didn't impeach and remove him, they could have kind of let Donald Trump slink off to Mar-a-Lago and just kind of be there, let things work around him and ignore him. But no, they had to go down, kiss the ring, bring Donald Trump back into the fold of the Republican Party. And when they did, they made him a legitimate candidate again. And he almost immediately said, yeah, I'm running for 24. Well, they didn't stop him. They had every opportunity to stop him, but they looked at it, they went, we have nobody that can capture that same 30 to 40% of the voter base. And what are we going to do? We want a chance to win in 24, so we're going to go with Donald Trump. It's a dumb idea, but they didn't have a choice. or didn't think they had a choice anyway. Republicans are tied to Donald Trump at this point. It's too late for him to walk away, and they uh, they know it. They are screwed with everything that happens to Donald Trump. Um, but when it all comes out, there's going to be a lot of things found out, and everybody who is connected to Donald Trump, a lot of these politicians, that information is going to see the light of day. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are facing criminal prosecutions. There's going to be people facing public backlash, and there's going to be a lot of people who may not be welcome back in the world of politics because of their connections to Donald Trump. So even though it is not a midterm election year or a general election year, there are major races going on this year in November, and that's only a few weeks away. And two of those are the race for governor of Virginia and governor of New Jersey. And I think both of those are going to end up going toward the Democrats. Now, if I wasn't sure about Democrats winning in Virginia before the government shutdown, I am now. Why? Well, because the government shutdown is affecting a lot of people who work in the federal government, and a significant number of them live in Virginia. So you got people who are now currently furloughed, don't know when they're getting paid, and they have to blame somebody. They're going to blame Republicans. So are they going to be voting in a Republican, even on the state level? Maybe not. Same with New Jersey doesn't have to deal with the federal government, but lately they have been more of a blue state. Um, and I think they're probably safer. But I think Republicans are watching both of those races, trying to figure out um, whether or not they've got a chance to win. And I don't think they do. And I think they're going to see how bad the percentages are. And I think it's going to change their perspective on a lot of things. Now, it is entirely possible that if we haven't reached a deal by these elections as the results come in, that may be something that spurs Republicans on to actually negotiating and coming up to some kind of a term and to some kind of a resolution to this so that they open the government back up because they're going to get blown away in this these elections, I think, and it's probably going to be more lopsided than people are expecting. Um, so they're watching that. And then you have the mayoral race in New York City. Now, I'm not in New York, I'm in Iowa. So I don't have a dog in the fight. But when it comes to the mayoral race, I think this Mamdani, I think he ultimately wins, in part because he's got the Democratic nomination and because the other two people are not serious candidates. Um, you got Cuomo, who had resigned after major allegations, I believe, of sexual harassment. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that was the reason he resigned as governor of the state of New York. And then the other guy who's running as a Republican, who I can't think of, I know he had other issues as well. Um, but it's a foregone conclusion. I think Mamdani wins. And Donald Trump is threatening, of course, all kinds of things to happen to New York City if he wins, of sending in the military and withholding funds, etc. I would like to see him try that because New York, eh, in general, as a state, is a donor state where they give more money to the federal government than they receive. So they could probably find a way to cover the differences with state funds and be okay if those funds don't come in. A lot of the funds that they do use are for other projects, and even Republican members of Congress from New York are saying, "Yeah, we can't really stop the funding for those projects because it's going to hurt Republicans too." But Donald Trump doesn't care about that. New York is a democratically controlled state, um, and he wants to go after people that he views as wronged him. So he doesn't care. He's going to do what he wants to do. Then there's the other race that people are watching, and that is Prop 50 in California. Now, Prop 50 is the race where they have taken it to the voter on whether or not to, for basically, I don't know if it's one time or if it is until the next census, change the voter maps to draw out 5 Republican-controlled districts in response to what Texas has done by redrawing their maps. And I don't know if Prop 50 is going to pass or not. I would think it would in California, but you never know how these voter measures are going to go. I kind of expected 2 voter measures in Florida to both pass. And while they got over 50%, they had changed the rules that you needed a supermajority and both failed. So you never know how these voter-led initiatives are going to go. But Prop 50, uh, I think, should pass because it would offset what the Republicans are trying to do in Texas. And why are Republicans gerrymandering? Well, they're trying to change the way that the electoral map works, or the congressional map works anyway, to get more seats in their favor. Why? Well, they can't win on policy. They don't have good policies. If they did, they wouldn't need to resort to these level of tricks and tactics. They would end up winning on every election, but they don't. So they are trying to make it harder for certain members of Congress to get reelected, specifically Democrats. Now, this could backfire in part because you are diluting your voting pool. In some of those districts in Texas that they changed that were Republican, they were Republican by like 63, 64%. They took 10% of that margin out. And now, if everybody votes the way they did before, they think it would be Republican by 54%. Well, that's a big change. And when Republicans aren't going to be very popular coming up in the midterms, I don't think, the economy hurting, people hurting, etc., there's a good chance some of those seats flip. And if they've diluted the voting pool down, it may incentivize Democrats to come out and actually vote and try to vote out some of these Republicans. Now we'll see how all of that plays out and how it all shakes out. But I think Republicans may have screwed themselves over in this process. It wouldn't surprise me. Now, with this restructuring, one of the things they did was, I believe it was Jasmine Crockett, a representative for Texas. She currently doesn't live in the district she represents anymore. They redrew her map and put her house outside of it and put it into a different district. Now, I think she's still eligible to run for um, her district. Some states have it where you have to live in the district you are in. Remember, Lauren Boebert had that problem in Colorado in this last election. She wanted to run for a different district. So she moved. She sold her house, bought a different house, and moved into the new district because it was favorable Republican. And they thought they were worried she was going to get beat in a closer race, in a more up for grabs seat. So they moved her into a safer district. So Jasmine Crockett may have to ultimately end up moving. We'll have to see. I don't know if Texas has that same law or not that requires you to live in the district you represent. Now, looking at the midterms coming up here in Iowa, I think Iowa has a great chance of flipping. Um, Now, some of the names running for Senate, I didn't entirely recognize. I know Marianne Miller Meeks, I think, is one of them. She represents Iowa's second congressional district. And I don't know how wide her margin was in 24, but she won her seat initially in 22 by only 6 votes. And now she is running for statewide office. And the thing is, I think Democrats have a good chance of picking up the Senate race here in Iowa. Now that Joni Ernst is gone, she chose not to run for reelection in part because of some of the horrific things she said. But when you take out that incumbent name and you force people to actually look at candidates, there's a better chance that Democrats win or that the seat flips in general. It happens it happens both ways. Now, in the election where we got Joni Ernst as a senator, a longtime Democrat, Tom Latham, had retired, and people were wondering who was going to run to replace him, etc. I don't remember who the Democratic candidate was, um, but I remember it being a closer race. But because it wasn't an incumbent, it gave Joni Ernst an advantage, and now Democrats are in that same boat going the other direction. So I think Iowa's senator could flip, and I think at least two, maybe three of Iowa's House districts could flip. Now, I don't expect Iowa District 4, which is the northwest quadrant of the state, if you kind of split the state into four, because they're pretty even. If you take I-35 and I-80 and use them as cross sections of the state, uh, you can almost piece out the state as far as your congressional map. But anyway, I don't think District 4 goes um, to the Democrats. That is a very rural area, and it has been Republican as long as I have been alive. Back when it was District 5, when we had five districts, that area still voted in Republicans. I don't think there's been a Democrat in there since the 70s, maybe even longer. Um, I mean, this is the same district that had brought us Steve King, that racist piece of crap who was in Congress, who ultimately ended up resigning, I think, or not running for reelection because he was such a known racist. Um, and he had other issues too. But that whole deal, I think Iowa could be in play. You have a governor race here in Iowa where you have Rob Sands, the only statewide elected Democrat currently running for governor, in again an open field because um, we don't know who's going to be the Republican nominee. We don't know for sure that Rob Sands is going to be the Democratic nominee, but I am almost convinced he's going to get that nomination um, because Kim Reynolds decided not to run for reelection. Again, she didn't want to lose. She was afraid of getting beat, so she turned around and said, "I'm not running." Now, the other reason I think Iowa might be in play is because of food stamp benefits. Now, I know we talked earlier about food stamp benefits not hitting by the first of the month for people on SNAP benefits, etc., and that affecting the government shutdown. But food stamps are going to be affecting people here in Iowa as well come next year. Now, there are a long list of things that are no longer going to be allowed under the food stamp program here in Iowa starting January 1 because Kim Reynolds got a waiver um, and tried to prevent people from buying certain foods on uh, food stamps. So any bakery fresh products at all. A lot of your grocery stores here in Iowa have bakeries in them where you can get, breads and rolls and donuts and those kind of things. Those used to be covered. They will not be. Any pre-made kitchen meals, meals to go, like a cold meatloaf dinner with two sides. And I know that's more of a boomer thing to say, but it's one of the first things that popped into my head. That wouldn't be allowed. No cold subs, no tea, no sugar, no juice, no pop. No, I think bottled water is even going to be excluded. Um, Juice can only be 100% juice. Limits on what types of cheese and meat you can get. Um, and it just continues. There's going to be so many things that will not be allowed under the food stamp program. Now, why would they do that? Well, because they want to get rid of the food stamp program. They want it to fail. They want people to not be on it because they think people that are on it are only on it because they're lazy. So if we make it too hard for them to use, then they are going to have to, go out and get a real job. They're going to have to go and actually do work and support themselves and not just accept government handouts, not realizing that um, a big chunk of people on those benefits do already hold jobs. They have it because their employers aren't paying them living wages and that, they have their own issues. I worked for a company several years ago where we were in that boat. We could have been paying people better, but we weren't. And Now, I wasn't in charge enough where I was able to make those kind of decisions, but that's another story. Uh, anyway, we had people that worked for us that were on government assistance. And what they would do is they would know when their review was up and say, okay, I need my pay to reflect the fact that, you know, I'm not, I need to stay under the guidelines. So I need to work a fewer hours for a little while. And why would they do that? Because the difference in the amount of money they could potentially make that would put them over the income limits and what was going to be taken in benefit were two different things. The one guy said he got, several $100s in food stamps a month. I don't remember how many, to support him and his family, but he would have been put over by like 30 or $40 over the income guideline and he would have lost all of it. And it wasn't worth it. So he wanted to make sure he stayed under, and he took just a smaller paycheck for a month or so to make sure he stayed under, because it wasn't worth making that extra money. But he had even said, if he could make up the difference and not be forced to do things like that, he would much rather do it. But that just wasn't possible working where we were working. The uh, the thing is, Republicans like to think that that are receiving government benefits are lazy. That's not always the case. There are some people who are unable to work who deserve to have access to food, but Republicans don't think so. They think they know better. They're doing all sorts of things when it comes to that. And like Kim Reynolds here in Iowa, one of the other things she did involving food was over the summer, she refused the extra money for the food stamp program that Biden had put forward, and said, no, we don't want to do that. Instead, we're going to just give out these boxes of food you can go to these handout locations and get, but it's going to be what we decide you can have, claiming it was all going to be healthier and healthier options and things like that. And I never heard that those actually took off and were popular at all. And I guarantee you, giving people who are on benefits access to more funds over the summer when their children were home from school and not getting school lunch 5 days a week, in some cases, school lunch and breakfast, um, would have actually been way more popular. But Republicans don't care about people. They want you to think they do, but they don't. Now, I haven't heard anything specifically here in Iowa. I haven't talked to any of my extended family that are in the farming industry recently, but I guarantee you things aren't uh, going very well here in Iowa when it comes to farming. And again, this could be another thing that leads to problems for Republicans getting elected here in the midterms, and throughout the Midwest for Republicans getting reelected. And that involves Donald Trump and these tariffs. Donald Trump puts tariffs on like China. China comes out and says, yeah, well, we're not going to buy any soybeans from you. They went from buying $20 billion in soybeans to buying zero. And that's a problem for American farmers. So now those contracts don't get fulfilled, and they were expecting to get paid a set amount for that 20 billion. That's not happening. And then you have Donald Trump and his cuts to USAID, the foreign aid arm of the government, where he's like, well, we shouldn't be giving out all this aid money to other countries. Okay. So he goes ahead and says, we're not giving, we're cutting it, and he cuts all this foreign aid. What happens? Well, farmers suffer. Why? Because whenever we gave out food assistance worldwide, by law, we were required to give or to buy it from American farmers, providing that they grew the crop necessary for us to give it away. There are some things we can't buy here because of climate, etc. But for the most part, if we can grow it, we supply it. And all of those contracts they were guaranteed for these farmers. Okay, you go ahead, you agree, you're going to grow us this many acres of land or this much crop, these many bushels, and supply it to us. and we guarantee we'll pay you this much money. And they signed for it at the beginning of the year. Now maybe it's a lower payout than what they could get in the free market, but it's guaranteed money, so they take it. That can't be good for American farmers and Iowan farmers here when they go to vote. They're going to be looking at it going, man, these Republicans, they fucked us over. Now you would think they would have done that in November at during the general election, remembering that Donald Trump put them in the same position as last time. Here's the thing. Between then and now, Donald Trump had bailed them out once. They got a big bailout from the government, and they were hoping that they'd get another one. I think a lot of them were expecting another bailout, but this comes from the party that likes to rail against government handouts and against socialism. But when it comes to the saving farmers, oh yeah, and I'm not saying we shouldn't save farmers. Don't get me wrong. We need American farmers. I have farmers in my extended family. And I feel bad for the ones that got blindsided and didn't see this coming, but how could you not? But they expected a bailout, and now we're hearing that Donald Trump has said, well, yeah, of course we need to do something. But he's been saying they need to do something going on for months. Now I'm hearing reports that they are opening back up like 21,000 USDA offices nationwide. And those offices are there to facilitate access for farmers to like $5 billion in federal aid, which is money they have sitting there that hadn't gotten distributed because of uh, something or other. I'm not entirely sure where it came from, but it's money that they have figured out they can use to help bail out farmers. But that's a drop into the bucket to what they really need. The first bailout in 2018 was $50 billion, and that wasn't even enough of what they needed, especially considering that they gave them a bailout initially, but that didn't solve they're going to have problems in the next couple of years as well. Because if China continues this boycott and not buying American soybeans, they got to figure out what they can grow. And some of the farmers may switch over to growing corn in those fields. Okay, that's fine. But then there's another problem. You have uh, this administration running to rail against any sort of green energy, which ethanol is part of green energy. And there is an amount of corn that gets grown specifically we turn into gasoline or ethanol. So if they're going against green energy, that might not be a market. There is an amount of corn that we grow every year to turn into high fructose corn syrup. But uh, RFK Jr., in his Make America Healthy Again campaign, wants to get rid of high fructose corn syrup in a lot of products. So that's gone. So then what happens? Where do they can't grow soybeans, they can't grow corn. What do they grow? Who knows? Maybe they convert it to grassland for a year. Now, there are government programs that do pay for doing things like that, but that doesn't solve their problem long term. And there's going to be more issues, even if they do get this bailout, you know, and that the government ends up being on the helping side for farmers. But no one should be surprised that Donald Trump is putting farmers on the back burner when it comes to this because, uh, you know, he got what he wanted out of them. He got their vote, and now that he has gotten their vote, he is transactional. There's nothing in it for him. I guarantee you, Donald Trump doesn't care about farmers. He's probably never stepped foot on a farm to do a day's worth of work in his life. Now, yesterday I did this story talking about how his plan to save the beef industry or to help lower grocery costs and beef costs here in this country would be to buy beef from Argentina. Okay. Uh, Now, that sent a lot of American producers and American farmers and ranchers over the edge. They were pissed. Well, they're like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you help out our industry? Why wouldn't you help out America first? And uh, Donald Trump comes back and basically tells these people who are in a lot of cases multi generational farmers and ranchers who have been doing it forever that he knows more about ranching and farming than they do. He knows more. A guy who was born into wealth in New York, who made his money in New York real estate, well, grifting really, and who has been a mildly successful businessman. Uh, and I say mildly successful because of all the bankruptcies. But anyway, I guarantee you, he's never stepped foot on a farm and done a day's worth of work on a farm. I know he has been on. I think he was on a farm in Butler, Pennsylvania, and a few other places where they held rallies because he was having trouble getting venues that would support uh, his rally. So um, he got supporters to donate the use of their farmland. But that just means Donald Trump grifted yet again and got them to donate to him something. But he's never done a day's worth of farm work in his life. Um, so that's just ridiculous. There's no way he knows more about farming and ranching than these people. But that is a typical narcissist thing to say. They will say about somebody else, I know more about your specialized field than you do. Donald Trump likes to believe he is the smartest person in the room on every given topic, and he proved it yet again. All right, that's going to do it today for the Analytical Iowan podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with more stories, but if you like my breakdown, my analysis, I know I was just over there a couple of days ago, but I am again today's guest on the Rational Boomer podcast. Now, Mike had reached out to me and we ended up recording. Um, and I thought it was going to be for later in the week, but turns out no, it was for today. So I am today's guest once again on the Rational Boomer podcast. Mike and I had a great discussion, and we do talk about different things than what we did Monday because things have changed in the world of politics. If you're following this and you're following me, there's always stuff going on. So I encourage you to check out Mike, the Rational Boomer. There is a link to his podcast in my bio under affiliated creators, um, or search for him wherever you get your podcast. I know a lot of you that follow me uh, came over from Mike and from the Rational Boomer. So, and I appreciate you for doing that. So if you like my appearances over there, I encourage you to check it out. Again, uh, I was the guest today. I'll probably be back again sometime next week talking to Mike as we break things down. And I will be back tomorrow with even more news stories because with this administration, there's always something to talk about.